Hello and welcome to this series. I'm Tyler Coffin, and throughout these videos we're going to take a look at a virtual instrument crafted in the likeness of Oberheim's polyphonic analog synthesizer, the Matrix-12, here now with the Arturia Matrix-12 V. Now, to start with a bit of history, Tom Oberheim and his company, Oberheim Electronics, made their name in the 70s, first making electronic effects devices, then the synthesizer expander module, or SEM, that could pair with a Mini Moog or ARP Odyssey via control voltage to increase options and expand those synthesizers or other ones like it, and then eventually Oberheim integrated the strengths of that into its own single portable package. The company continued to innovate and become a unique brand in the synthesizer market, which that market eventually started to demand the notion of polyphony to be a goal for the synthesizers coming out, going from monophonic to duophonic and continually adding voices, which started something of a voice race to see which heavyweight synth company could play more keys at a time in a useful way. Which today, with digital technology and things like that, we have practically countless voices when playing an instrument or synthesizer. It may seem odd nowadays to even think of the limitations on the amount of voices that can be played, but when dedicated analog hardware was the only way to generate a sound, creating ways that would play chords was a big step forward, though often an expensive one. But analog polyphonic synthesizers started to come out, and Oberheim was a key player, working through the 70s and 80s with releases like the OB1 in 78, OBX in 79, OBXA in 1980, the OB8 in 83, and the Expander in 1984. And then come 1985, the Matrix-12 was released, which employed the same voice architecture as its predecessor, the Expander, but of course being a new release did expand upon that. At a $5,000 retail price, which was reasonably low at the time, even though obviously now that's a bit steep. But at that cost, it did need to cut a few corners in terms of hardware, yet still innovated in how it worked for a lot of the usage of many parameters in a polyphonic synthesizer with multiple oscillators and voices. So using a matrix layout for signal routing, somewhat akin to a pin matrix, but not so literally that, it granted a great deal of control not available with other synthesizers using switches or buttons to be able to change key parameters. Around this time, despite impressive releases, Oberheim Electronics would fall on difficult times and change hands a number of times in the following years and decades, eventually finding its way back to Tom Oberheim himself from Gibson in 2019. But long story short, the Matrix-12 was a powerful synth that combined the best strengths of an iconic synth company at the height of classic synthesizer popularity, and even today, it's a very sought-after instrument. Lucky for us, we can get our hands on it in a virtual package with the Matrix-12 V, which grants us its versatile and powerful sound design abilities in a classic workflow, and also allows us the modern conveniences that expand what we can do even further than in the past. So before we get going, just a few quick notes to mention. Most of this series will be in the standalone version, but we can, of course, run the Matrix-12 V as a VST, AU, or AAX plugin in your choice digital audio workstation. This, of course, being FL Studio, but wherever you are, you'll be able to use the Matrix-12 V if those plugins are supported. And, of course, everything in the synth itself will be the same wherever you run it, except for the audio settings and MIDI settings that will depend on how the setup of your DAW would be. Here in the standalone settings, you have your audio device, which of course will depend on your audio interface driver, everything like that, and how you're going to want things to actually run through. This is the hardware I have, and for the standalone, I'm running it like this. And then setting up MIDI, you have the devices that you want to include, and then the tempo, which for some parameters you will have a tempo to sync to. If you're running in a DAW, this sort of thing will be set in there. The tempo, for instance, would be wherever that would be, and the audio settings and the MIDI settings as well will be set up however that DAW would do so. Overall, a pretty straightforward setup though. One more thing, we might resize our window to be a different size. At 90%, we kind of fill our screen, but if we want to get into some of the smaller parameters, and if you're on a screen that might be bigger or smaller than this, you can resize to fit your layout, but it's easy enough to do so up here. We'll keep it at 90 for the moment. But at this point, we're ready to get things rolling. So in the next video, we'll take a look at the user interface and the overall layout and basic operation of the Matrix-12 V. So I will see you then.